welcome back to my channel. If you're new, my name is Holly, and over here on my channel I speak all about sewing. I do tutorials, tips and tricks videos, and of course show you what I've been making. For today's video I'm going to be talking through all the essential items that you need to start sewing. I'm not talking about the really fun things that we can spend our money on that we don't actually need. I'm talking about the actual essential things. So if you really want to start sewing and you're thinking, what do I actually need? Where can I get it from? I want it to be cheap. This is a video for you. So let's start with number one. Of course, a sewing machine. This is if you want to actually sew clothes, cushions, anything like that you can't hand sew. So this is what this is my sewing machine, which is just a domestic brother sewing machine. Any sewing machine, you can spend anything on a sewing machine basically. You can start at a real basic one. I remember seeing them in John Lewis, Hobbycraft, those sort of places for around £70–100. So that's the sort of minimum price you're looking for a sewing machine, and then you can spend up to the thousands on sewing machines. But if you are starting as a beginner, I would always recommend spending around 100 to 200 on a sewing machine just while you're getting into it. So sewing machine. If you're starting as a beginner, I would always recommend trying to spend as least amount as possible on fabric, but the fabric that I'd recommend to start sewing on is cotton. Cotton fabric is a really great fabric. It's really easy to sew. It sort of stays where you tell it to stay. You can fold it. It presses and irons really well. So that is what I'd start with, is a cotton fabric. The cheapest way to get cotton fabrics, there's about 3 ways I would recommend trying when you're first starting to sew. First of all, look if you have any old pillowcases or bed sheets that you don't want anymore and that you're willing to cut up and just sew on basically. It's a great way. You've got a large amount of fabric, it's cotton and it's free. Also, the second way is to look in any charity shops for any cotton fabric or bedding, anything like that to practice on. That's always a great cheap way. Or if you're looking for, you want to buy fabric, your best cotton fabric is calico. Calico, I got a little sample here, is like unbleached, really basic cotton fabric. This cotton fabric, calico, is from IKEA. They do a great calico, which is about £2.20, I think, a metre. I'll leave it linked below in the description box. But that's a great way to start as well, to get real basic, cheap cotton that you can practice sewing on your machine, stitches, seams, anything that you want to practice. So get yourself some cheap fabric. The next essential item you're going to be needing is pins or clips, but I would recommend using pins if you're starting out sewing. You need pins to be able to secure 2 sections or 3 sections of fabric together while sewing. So they're very important, and these can be picked up really cheaply. I always get, you might not be able to see, always get the pins with a pin head on like this, because they're a little bit easier when you're pinning. You've got something to hold on to, especially while you're learning to sew, because they can be taken out really easy while you're using a sewing machine. You can buy loads of pins online. Sometimes the more cheaper ones tend to be a little bit more rough metal, which then can snag your fabric, so just be careful of that. But you can pick up pins easy on eBay, Amazon. You can even get them from supermarkets really cheaply in a pot, so you definitely grab yourself some of them. Next essential item, which I personally think is essential because this makes life so much easier when you're learning to sew, is getting yourself a pin cushion or a magnet like this. I will show you my amazing pin cushion. It's a little teacup. How cute is that? Like a little. But yeah, get yourself a pin cushion that is just basically something you can have next to you that you can stick your pins in and take out really easily. Pins can be really fiddly to use when they just arrive in the box. Sometimes they'll be really hard to get out, fiddly, put them back in. So I'd always recommend getting yourself a Pincushion. You don't need a fancy one like this. You can even just use a normal cushion and stab pins in, as long as you remember to take them back out. And you can buy them really cheaply online. Also, you can get magnets as well. I have a funky donut magnet, which just sits there, and then you can just literally just place your pins on top, and then they hold. So yeah, you also can get a magnet if you think that's something you'd prefer over a pincushion. Right, so the next item are scissors. You will definitely be needing scissors to start sewing, and I always recommend getting 2 pairs of scissors, and you'll need 1 pair only for fabric and then 1 pair only for paper. You'll be using the fabric scissors for just cutting your fabric. You do not use them for anything else, because using fabric scissors for paper or anything like that can blunten them, and you really want a nice sharp cut when you're cutting your fabric. And so then also you need your paper scissors if you're going to be sewing with patterns, and you're going to be cutting the patterns out, so you need some scissors for that. These are my scissors. Another great tip is for your fabric scissors, if your scissors look similar and you don't want to get them confused, just put a little tag of fabric around the handle, and then you know that is your pair of fabric scissors. My fabric scissors weren't expensive. They were from Aldi in like their sewing week that they were doing, and I basically just want a comfortable pair of scissors. That's why I chose them. They're really good. You can pay a lot for fabric scissors, but if you're starting out, you don't need to. Just make sure they're fabric scissors, and yeah, and it'll be great. These are my paper scissors, and these are just a normal pair of scissors basically from Dunelm, I think. Yeah, so paper scissors can be anything, any type of scissors, but just to make sure you've got 2 types that are separate. Your next item is a seam ripper, which is, let me just grab it, it's got a little lid, is one of these. It has a handle, and then it has a spiky thing here, which is quite sharp, and then a little stopper here. Now you will be needing one of these. All sewers need one of these. It is, put the lid back on, it is for if you've made a mistake. You just unpick the seam by putting the spike underneath the stitch and cutting it out. Especially when you're starting, you will be making mistakes and you'll be needing a seam ripper. Anyone always makes mistakes, so it's always handy to have a good seam ripper. I would recommend getting one with a larger handle like this. You can see in my hand. It's just really easy to hold while unpicking. You can get small seam rippers, which are about that long, really small, and have a really small handle, and they're a little bit harder and more fiddly to unpick, so I wouldn't recommend that. I'd always get one with the biggest handle. This is just a simple plastic and metal one. I think I picked this up from a fabric fair maybe at about £1. You don't need to spend a lot of money on a seam ripper, so don't. Just make sure it's comfortable to be using. So that is a seam ripper. Your next item you'll be needing is some sewing thread, which comes like this. If you're going to be using a sewing machine, you definitely need to buy some thread. If you're just at the start practicing, just, you know, sewing, using a machine, you can pick up any type of thread. You can get cotton thread or poly cotton thread. So if you're just practicing and learning at the start, you can buy any type of thread. This is, I don't know how long this is. This is 1,000 meters on here. Obviously the more meters you buy, the more expensive it is. So you can get like even like 100, 500 rolls of thread for a couple of pounds. So I'd recommend getting that at the start, just while you're practicing. And then when you want to start making your first item, your garment, you then can pick the thread to match your fabric. Right, the next item you'll be needing is a tape measure. It's a really simple sewing item, but you really will need it. If you're planning on making garments for yourself and clothes and using a sewing pattern, you'll have to measure yourself to work out what pattern you're going to be using. And it's also just, you'll be measuring fabric, you'll be measuring everything while sewing and learning. So always get yourself a tape measure. I've got one, this one's actually got centimetres on both sides, but you can get one with centimetres on one side and inches on the other, so that's really handy. Again, you don't need to spend a lot on a tape measure, only a couple of pounds at the most. Yeah, I'll leave links below on all the cheaper items that I find that would be good for the starter sewers. eBay is a great place to find these type of things like pins, tape measure, seam ripper, like I said before. So always look on eBay. So your 9th essential item for sewing is some type of chalk to mark your fabric. I have a chalk roller stick here that you I'll show you. You roll it along and you've got loose chalk that comes out. This is a more expensive version of chalk, where it's probably about £4 or £5, where you can just put loose chalk in the cartridge. But you can just buy sticks of chalk for a couple of pounds, again on eBay. You'll be needing chalk or chalk pencil, they also do, which is easier to use. You'll be needing chalk to mark your fabric details on what you're making. You don't want to use pencil, pen, because you'll see it through the fabric and then you won't be able to get it off, and then that will be marking the garment. So chalk is needed. And the last essential item that you'll be needing to get if you wanted to start sewing is a hand needle. So I don't know if you can see, but just a needle with a little eye on it, which you thread your thread for any small hand sewing details. In sewing, you always will have some type of element of hand sewing, even if it's small. I try to avoid it, but there still are times that you will need to do some type of hand sewing, if it's finishing a hem, sewing a button on, anything like that. So getting yourself a hand sew needle is really essential. You can pick them up in little packs, maybe of like 6, 7, all different sizes with different holes on the top. Again, you can get them from eBay for a couple of pounds. So I'd recommend getting hand sew needles. Right, so those were my top 10 essential items if you want to start sewing. Those are all your basic things that you need to buy if you want to start sewing. Some are more expensive, such as a sewing machine, but some of them you can really pick up really cheap for a couple of pounds. And they are worth the investments. When you start, if you start to enjoy sewing more, you can always invest in a higher price or a fancier version if you want to. But those are just my recommendations. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I do a lot of these type of videos, tips, tutorials and guides, and I also show what I've been making throughout the months. So if that's something you would like to watch, subscribe please. I also have a sewing blog with lots of tutorials, step-by-step guides with photos, that sort of thing. And I also have a sewing Instagram page which I share my day-to-day sewing life and sort of in the moment photos of things of what I'm making. So if that's something you're interested, I'll leave that linked below as well. But I will see you again soon. Bye.